Podcasting from Hartford, you're listening to the Connecticut Scoreboard Podcast.
So today we've got with us David Woods. He covers Butler basketball. David, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Jared. I'm really looking forward to Saturday's game for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, so let's get right into things. So we've got UConn-Butler, knock on wood, coming up Saturday afternoon. And it's a matchup I think UConn fans have been excited about. It's a rematch of the national championship from 2011 there, an exciting one. And ready to get this Big East rivalry underway. David, I want to start with this one. When UConn was added back into the Big East, I know we had a lot of thoughts from some of the East Coast schools. How did a school like Butler react to UConn rejoining the conference this year?
I'm not sure Butler had any specific reaction. I know my immediately thought was, well, that's another, potentially pretty good historic program join the league because it makes it tougher. Because honestly, I still think forever, as long as Butler is in the Big East, I just think it's going to be a strain for them. They have a good basketball brand. I mean, they, as a platform, there's nothing that you can't do in basketball, from Butler. I mean, you obviously you can go to the national championship game, you can play in the NBA, you get in the tournament, you're on national TV all the time. But still, it doesn't have this massive budget, and they sometimes, I think, have trouble shedding that label as a so-called mid-major. Although I don't know how you could say that when they belong to the, one of the Power Six conferences and have actually held their own. I mean, certainly the potential is there for Butler to join the Big East and become irrelevant, but that really hasn't happened.
So looking at this season, I know coming into the year, Butler was in the preseason poll number 8 in the Big East. And I know they've gotten off to, a bit of an up and down start, had some injuries, had a losing streak there, 5 of 6 until the Georgetown game the other night. How would you sum up this Butler season so far to this point?
When I sit back and really think about it, I really think this entire season is Butler's 21-22 preseason. I mean, it just doesn't look like this group has enough talent, or enough time to get in the NCAA tournament field, which isn't a catastrophe. And I don't even know actually how many Big East teams are going to get in. I don't know if the conference is going to get, more than 4 or 5 teams in, and we've had as many as I think 7 before. To me, right now, that the top teams are Villanova, Creighton, Seton Hall, and who am I missing? I think, and then Connecticut. I think I rank about 5th, but it's just their freshmen are doing great. But, 2 of their this highest ranked Butler recruiting class ever, and 2 of these guys are now out with knee injuries. The other freshmen are performing well. Aaron Thompson, I mean, when a much more talented and experienced team lost Thompson last year, they floundered. So certainly this team is going to flounder. They really did, it was kind of vintage Butler against Georgetown. They really gritted that one out. But let's face it, Georgetown is a poor shooting team, and it's just not that good either. So Butler just doesn't reload like Duke or North Carolina or Kentucky or Kansas. And I think long term their future is great, but this season I just think it's going to be 2 months of scuffling.
I know we've got Aaron Thompson as really kind of the focal point of this Butler team. Outside of Aaron, who are some players that UConn fans might not be familiar with that will play a big role come Saturday's game?
Well, there are 2 freshman guards, Chuck Harris, who's from Washington, D.C., and Miles Tate out of South Carolina are really exceptional players. I went through, heading into the Georgetown game, both of those guys were I kind of picked maybe you saw the 2 esoteric. Both were averaging more than 9 points a game. I looked at every team in the entire Power Six. They're the only team in the country that had 2 freshman guards averaging as much as 9 points a game. So I thought that was, moderately significant. Obviously,
Mhm.
part of that's opportunity getting the minutes, but nonetheless, I mean, those guys are proving to be as good as advertised. So those guys are pretty good. I'm still kind of waiting for um, junior center forward Bryce Golden to have a breakout. At one time, I thought he had like all Big East potential because he's able to bang inside. He can drift away from the basket and make shots. I think he was ailing for a while. Butler hasn't been very forthcoming on some of these guys' injuries, and then he went a 3-week pause for COVID. He played pretty well against Georgetown last night, and I think Bryce Golden is a guy to watch. And then their transfer from South Carolina, Jair Bolden, has been their most consistent shot maker, and he made some big ones against Georgetown. At one time, he was leading the Big East in threes per game. I think he's still probably right around that.
I'm very familiar with Jair. I'm a GW alumni, so
Okay, yeah.
I remember Jair's early days over at GW. So I'm excited to see him in a newer role on a Butler team coming up this weekend. I know you went through some of those players there. How would you say the depth of this Butler team is? Are we going to see kind of just 6 or 7 guys, or will they go deeper into the bench?
Actually, their depth is adequate. They've had a couple of guys that actually I think have been kind of disappointing, but Marquis Hastings last in the Georgetown game, he played a career high 18 minutes off the bench. And he had 4 points, but he had 7 rebounds. I mean, that's pretty good production, in that limited minutes. So he's kind of come through a little bit. I think he counts as a redshirt sophomore. Anyways, his only second year playing, and he was like a non-entity last year. And the year before, he had hip surgery. And Butler's had some other players with hip surgeries, and it's like those guys' careers are over after that happens. So that was encouraging for them. And then Miles Wilmeth, who is a 6'9" player who has played at a Rhode Island prep school, he's occasionally given Butler some decent minutes off the bench. And now if Aaron Thompson back, they can start him and Bolden and Chuck Harris and bring Miles Tate off the bench. And Miles Tate scored 22 points at Seton Hall. So, Butler's depth, they're not all great players, but they don't lose too much when they go to the bench. And occasionally those guys have given them a lift.
In terms of the style of play of Butler, I know you mentioned that the game yesterday against Georgetown was one of those vintage Butler where they kind of grind it out. It's a gritty game. And I think UConn fans well remember a gritty, grinded out national championship game against Butler.
People at Butler don't like to remember that game at all, as you can probably understand.
I can imagine there. But in terms of the style of play, how has this team played under Coach Jordan? And how is that different from the style that Coach Stevens ran at Butler?
Frankly, it hasn't deviated much at all. That's one of the, I've been emphasized enough. Butler pretty much plays the same now as it played when I started on this beat 20 years ago. And they've had like 5 coaches in that time. So, that's just, where in America has that happened? Constant coaching change. But what Butler does, never changes. Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's in a time warp. It's amazing. It's a relatively slow paced. I think when Laval got here, I think he wanted to play a little faster. And sometimes I think they do need to play faster because this is not that potent of an offensive team. But you look at the KenPom rankings, their tempo is one of the slowest teams in the country. And they kind of like it that way and play better that way. Now, having said that, a guy like Miles Tate reminds me a little bit of the former Illinois guard, D. Brown, who is labeled a one-man fast break. Tate is very quick, and Thompson is actually very good in the open floor, but Butler does not, want to turn the ball over, and they don't take very many risks. So consequently, they play at a slower pace, and they limited Georgetown in transition in the second half, and Georgetown was making some transition threes, and Butler's defense wasn't quite as organized. But once they got into a half-court possession-by-possession game, they just kind of grinded Georgetown down over the course of the second half.
Looking ahead to the game on Saturday, if Butler's going to be in this game, what are some of their biggest strengths that UConn's going to have to try to limit come game time?
Well, one thing that Georgetown did that almost no opponents Butler's played have been able to do is get offensive rebounds. And I watched the UConn Marquette game the other day, and obviously, UConn has a lot of length.
Mhm.
Is good on the offensive glass, and if they can do that to Butler, I don't think Butler can keep up. Butler needs to contest that initial shot, get a miss, clear the rebound, and not let Connecticut take multiple shots. So I think that's definitely a key for Butler. And then Butler can have these horrible droughts that they've had from time to time. And it probably sounds like a cliche, but their offense really needs to help their defense.
Mm.
They can't make turnovers or make errant shots that kind of is like the first pass and a fast break for the other team. So they probably do need to keep the game at a slower pace, unless the UConn guards are careless and they get steals and go in for shots. But from what I saw, I mean, Book Night is player of the year candidate in the league, and Connecticut just did not look sloppy to me.
Yeah, it should definitely be an interesting contrast in some of the styles of the way these two teams play. I know one of the big things about Butler that everyone's excited about, and I know for UConn fans, can't wait to be able to travel to a game at Hinkle. What's it been like with the games there at Hinkle this year? I know there are some limited fans. Does it still have that same feeling for a road team coming in there at all?
No, not really. Now you can, there is some, like, as opposed to artificial noise, there's some like real sound in the building if there's 12 or 13 or 1,400 fans. And I've been in there, including for women's games and high school games, when it's not that many, and it seems kind of cool, but they're all spread out all over. And in fact, if somebody, someone at the last minute from Stores wants to drive to Hinkle and go into the game, I think you'd feel pretty safe, because you could just get a ticket, go hide up in the rafters, and you can see fine. You're not near anybody.
Mm.
So I know there's a lot of controversy about whether we should even be playing college basketball in the pandemic season, but you can wear a mask and you can socially distance. It's really not that complicated. Butler is probably one of the few schools that's even allowing fans in, but boy, sure not very many, and they're spread out all over the place.
Absolutely. David, I really appreciate the time helping me break down this Butler team and giving UConn fans something to look forward to in a matchup I know everyone's really excited to get underway and, start another rivalry with Butler up.
It'll be interesting. I remember when Coach Hurley brought his Rhode Island team here. So he has been to Hinkle Fieldhouse before.
Right. The A-10 days. Yeah.
Yeah, the A-10 days. Yeah. So that's kind of cool that I even remembered that he had done that. So he actually has coached a team in this building before.
All right. We'll see if that experience helps play out for UConn on Saturday.
I know Butler needs Hinkle magic, all the Hinkle magic they can get to beat UConn, because it's a good team. It's probably coming on a little bit.
Absolutely. David, really appreciate the time, and thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Jared.